on.
Collins
Still
was there.
on.
Play on. Still the last
Still
tackle.
on.
Big numbers left. Sloan decides to kick. Here come the Dragons. Here come the Dragons. Oh my goodness. Who writes these scripts? Rugby league. You beautiful thing.
G'day coaches, it's Coach Krupt and welcome to another SuperCoach Strategy podcast. First of all, just want to say a huge thank you to everyone that gave me some really great feedback on my last podcast. If you haven't checked that out, I definitely recommend going onto YouTube or Spotify or Apple, all the platforms, and you can take a watch or a listen to it there. That podcast was about Iongi versus three-gun fullback strategy or structures and the pros and the cons to both setups. I was an initial believer of the three-gun fullback strategy, but after weighing up some more pros and cons and looking at it a little bit deeper than just at a very superficial level, I deem that there is a lot of pros to actually going the Iongi strategy to start off with. However, I look at both structures and which one possibly might be the one for you. If you haven't seen it, like I say, take a listen, well worth the look. Just want to, while I'm at it, talking about socials, if you haven't subscribed yet, it means a lot to me. I earn no money from doing all these podcasts and all the content on social media. So if you haven't subscribed, if you would just mind pausing the video, just press the subscribe button down below or the like button, and it means the world to me, and also throws a bit more support, gets my videos a bit more seen, which then allows me to do more of this content. That's on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, or Apple, whatever you prefer. So who is Coach Krupt? Well, I've mentioned this in a few videos. I am an international game player, so I've played games all around the world, particularly poker. I have played at the World Series of Poker multiple times and played in many poker events across Australia and here in Queensland. I've also been on Survivor as well back in the early days. But what do I bring up the poker for? Poker, I think, actually has some key benefits that align pretty closely with SuperCoach. Whether it be poker or whether it be SuperCoach, I like to think of both those games in three elements. So we have the beginning element, the first third, we have the middle element, the second third, and then we have the end game, which is the last third of the tournament, or whether it be a SuperCoach game. So in poker, let's talk about that. In poker, we have a few different playing styles that we look for as poker players to see what type of people we have sitting at the table with us playing against us. We have something we call a nit or a rock. We have really loose aggressive players. We have those passive aggressive players. We have conservative players. And we have a range of players that sit down and play the game. Now, I think in SuperCoach, we also have a similar thing in SuperCoach. I feel like we have some people out there that like to attack the game in a really tight but aggressive manner. Others that are very loose and aggressive, meaning lots of nuffs, just bring in and chase the cash and upgrade the players as quickly as they can. No depth to their team, but they're just loosely going about just building their team or their top 17 or 18 players up as fast as they can with no kind of care in the world about the remaining 8 or so players in their team. And then we have those passive players as well, those players that believe it's the long game and just want to slowly build into it. We don't want to rush. We don't want to be spending too many trades early. We have those passive players too that be very careful of their boost, save some for the end game. Let's not go too hard too quickly. So we have a few different styles of players in SuperCoach, and I think they closely align to the poker table. At the poker table, we are always looking for angles. We're looking for protecting our chip stack, particularly at the start of a tournament where we can easily blow the game up straight away if we overbet on a pot, or if we haven't calculated the pot odds correctly or implied odds. We have to be careful at the start of a poker tournament, and I think when you're setting up your SuperCoach team, it's important as well to be cautious there as well. And what do I mean by that? In SuperCoach, I think it's important when we first create a team not to be too concerned if you go a bit more on the cautious side or the boring side a little. I see a lot of teams online and sent to me as well where they're really trying to hit all those pods straight away from the get-go. I just would warn you about that and say maybe just rein it in a little bit. If you want to have 1 or 2 pods to start off with, go for it, no problems. But to be chasing 4, 5, 6 pods just because you want to have a different team to everyone else to get the jump on them, more likely than not, that will end up seeing you chasing for the whole season. Now, as I've mentioned, if you've listened to my pods before, in 2023, so only 2 seasons ago, I was coming 13th overall for many weeks or rounds at the back end of the season. And I can tell you now, it's a lot more fun being up at the pointy end, actually pushing for the top 100, the top 50, or even to win the thing. So to do that, you really need to try and nail this preseason team, or at least very quickly get to the right team after the rounds 3, 4, 5, even 6 have commenced. You really want to get your team pretty well settled with all the right cheapies in there, all the right value players, and some of those guns that are popping off, and particularly nailing those captains week after week. So that's kind of what we're looking for. Now, you can do that in the preseason, but again, I'd say maybe just rein and be a bit more conservative at the start with regards to the going for pods, a team of pods, or many pods in your team. Like I say, 1 or 2, maybe even 3, no problems. But if you start loading up on 3, 4, 5, 6 pods in your team, you could find yourself in a world of hurt. So that's regarding team structure. The aggressive style, though, is something I want to talk about. And I mentioned this on a video from last season, and I had a stack of people watch that video and some really great comments on it. If you haven't seen that, I highly recommend after this video, you go back and you'll watch the other podcast on the anatomy of it setting up a preseason team. So the strategy and structure behind a preseason team. I go into great depth in those videos from last season, and they're still valid for this season, even with the slight changes we've got in SuperCoach. They're really valid with regards to what to look for and my thoughts around the risks associated, or the strategy behind the early buys. And I talk about how some people out there don't believe that the early buys matter at all, and I debunk that myth completely. Because they do matter, and very briefly, they do matter, because with those early buys, it's not just one player on one round having a buy like Tino. It is true. If you only have one Titan, and it was Tino this year, then absolutely that's true. It's one player, one round, one buy, and it means not a great deal. You absolutely can have a player on an early buy and not worry about that too much. The problem though comes in when we start multiplying it. When we have not just Tino, but we also have another Gold Coast player. And then next round we have another player or 2 that's on a buy, and then followed by another player or 2 that's on a buy. And all of a sudden, every round for the first 5, 6 rounds, maybe even 7 rounds, you've got one player, one round on a buy. Well, it's not one player, one round. It's one player for the first 6 or 7 rounds is on a buy. So, and if that's a premium player, it really does matter, particularly when you're talking about positions where we only have, say, 2 or so to choose from. So we're talking about our halfbacks, we're talking about 5'8", we're talking about hookers. If we don't have a great deal of players to choose from, it absolutely impacts the point scoring potential of that team. You're playing at a reduced salary cap, because your salary cap is about $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 reduced than what mine might be, or other players might be, because you're playing always with a gun short every week for the first 5 or 6 weeks. And you don't have the depth at that stage to actually, because it's early rounds and you haven't built up enough value, you don't have the depth just yet to be able to bring in a 19th, 20th player who's also a gun and replace that gun that's on a buy. That comes later in the season, the mid part of the season to later part of the season. So again, I go back to that structure I mentioned, like a poker tournament. We have an early, a mid, and a late structure or parts components to a tournament, and we play slightly differently through each of those. However, in a SuperCoach, I believe we should do the same. We have the early part of the tournament or the competition. We need to set our team up really well, and we need to also minimize how much of our salary cap is actually not being used. In other words, on a buy. One player, one round on a buy, not a big deal. But every round, it is a deal. Anyway, go back, have a look at that podcast. I'll talk about it in depth, and it's well worth a listen so you can structure your team really well. All right, let's talk about... So in this podcast, I want to talk about a few things. I want to talk about the flex position today. So this podcast will be about flex position. I want to also talk about the vice captain loophole and how that's going to now change, because this season is the first season in NRL SuperCoach that we've brought in the flex position. So I want to talk about some strategies and structures around that and suggest some ideas, things that we could do. I want to talk about the size of our teams and how we set up that team. We also will have a quick look at the Iongi versus 3-gun fullback structure. We'll talk a little bit about the picking of 2 teams. So again, I mentioned this on an earlier podcast from last year, but I want to just touch on it briefly again about how we don't just pick one team. You should always pick 2 teams when it comes to your SuperCoach team. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a little bit later. We'll talk about trading and boosting, what my thoughts are around the strategy for trading and boosting. And also we're going to be talking about some questions that I've had come in from some listeners of mine or some people who follow my Twitter page and Facebook page who have DM'd me or sent me some messages, and I got some questions there I'd like to touch on. All right, let's get stuck into it. Flex position. So a lot of people, when the flex rule first came out for this season, there was a lot of people out there that weren't overly happy about the change, or they didn't. They thought it might have dumbed it down a little bit, made it a little too easy for beginners to play the game, and it took away some competitive edge that coaches, especially experienced coaches, had when there was no flex position. However, I have to disagree. I actually love the flex position. I think it adds a lot of elements to it that you can utilize to your advantage. And I still think once we get used to it and start using it appropriately, it'll have a different type of use at the start to the end of the season. So I think we're going to have to adapt with it, and obviously in the middle as well when we go through buys. But let's get back to basics. Let's talk about the flex position. So what is flex? Flex just basically means we used to, and I'm going to refer back to this a lot, what did it used to look like, SuperCoach, and what does it look like now with the flex? So SuperCoach, we used to have to choose 13 players on the field and then 4 reserves. So 17-player team. And we'd have 25 players to choose those 17 playing players that we would get scores from. Now we do exactly the same. We choose 13 players on the field, and we choose 4 reserves that we think will score the best. We highlight and select those as reserves. But then we also choose one more, an 18th player, a flex player. And that flex player can be from any position at all. It can be, you can put into there a halfback, you can put into there a hooker, you can put into there a front rower, a fullback, whatever you would like. Any player at all can go into your flex position. So now you're choosing not 17 like we did last year and all the other seasons. Now we're choosing 18 players. But you're not going to get 18 scores. You'll only get 17 scores. So whoever has the highest scores out of your 18 players, the top 17 of those will count. So it doesn't matter whether it's a fullback, a hooker, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter if it was your captain or not. It will not matter. Whoever scored the highest points out of your 18 players, the top 17 of them will count. And the 18th one, the lowest scoring out of your 18, will disappear. You won't see that one. So basically, it's similar to how we used to run our what we called mini buys our major buys last couple of seasons, where we would do a best 13 rule. Well, this is a best 17 rule. So your best 17 scores out of the 18 you select, you'll get the scores for. So it doesn't have, the flex position will come in irrespective of what happens to the rest of your team, the other 17 players. What I mean by that is you don't have to receive a HIA or someone being sent off the field or getting injured in the first minute of the game for your flex to kick in. It absolutely might come in then, but that doesn't have to occur for you to get your flex score. Your flex score is basically just another reserve. It's another person, and therefore forming your 18 players, and whatever are the best 17 scores, that's who you'll receive, irrespective of whether that includes your flex or not. So some weeks you might hypothetically not even get your flex position if your flex scorer was your 18th worst scorer of your 18 players. If you choose a captain and he gets injured and after a minute of the game on 1 point and he doubles to 2 points, but 2 points is your lowest score, guess what? He would also drop out if that is your 18th highest score of the 18 players you selected. And for that given week, you won't get a captain score because your captain dropped out of your team. Your vice captain won't double because you did select the captain and he did go onto the field. He just happened to get a really low score due to injury or HIA or whatever it might be, and he just disappears. So you'll get the best 17. So how does that work then with auto emergency? I've had many questions about auto emergencies and looping. How does that work? And it's really, really important. I did make some posts about this on Twitter, but it's really, really important that we understand how vice captain looping and auto emergencies work. This year, it's more important than ever. So this year, I believe that nearly every SuperCoach player that understands this concept and how this works will vice captain Loophole more than any season they've ever done before. I honestly believe that it won't surprise me for coaches to be doing over 10 vice captain Loopholes this season, maybe even more than that. So why am I saying that that's going to be popular this season? Okay, so with vice captain Loophole, let's go back to what was the case last year. Let's understand that to see what the change is and how things have changed. So last season and the years before, what would happen is you would choose a captain and you would choose a vice captain. Now, if your vice captain would always play before your captain, and you'd get a free look to see if that vice captain went well. And that throw at the stumps, if that particular vice captain got, let's say, 150 points, and you said, great, I want that vice captain to be my captain now. I want to double that 150 vice captain score and make it my captain. So what we would do is we would then take whoever you thought out of your 17 players, or actually out of your 13 that were on the field, whoever you thought would be your lowest scoring player, you would take them off your team and bring in a player that wasn't playing that round. That's what we used to do. We'd bring in a player that wasn't playing that round and then would throw the captaincy on them. And when you captain that player that's not playing that round, as soon as that team plays, then your captain wouldn't have scored any points because they didn't take the field. So your vice captain score, the 150, would double. And now you've got 300 points. So your vice captain became your captain due to your captain not taking the field because you brought a player on. And you took a playing player off and took the reserve off them on the field. So now you played one player short because you had a captain on your team that didn't play. So then you would receive your auto emergency score, which is so you chose 13 on the field and 4 reserves. And then you had all the rest of your players that you didn't reserve. So whoever scored the lowest amount of points out of all those players that you didn't choose to play that week, you get their score. This is how it worked last year. You'll receive their score. And that could be a 10, a 15, it's possibly a real cheapy player, someone that's might only be getting 20 minutes of game time, and they might have scored 15, 20 points. Well, you're going to receive their score because that was the lowest non-scoring player that you come into your team as your auto emergency. So you'll get the 300 from your vice captain, but you're also going to receive your lowest scoring player that you didn't choose. So that's the decision that us coaches had to weigh up. Was it worth the double points for our vice captain if we're going to also receive the lowest scoring non-player that we didn't choose? But it's changed. And it's changed in a big way this season. So you must understand this concept in order to do the best that you can this season, because this is going to be a big difference between those coaches that understand this concept and don't. So with the vice captain loophole this year, with the flex position, we no longer have 17 players. As I discussed before, we now have 18 players. So what's that mean? What that means is we have the 13 on the field, our 4 reserves that we choose and select, and then our flex, and that becomes our 18th player. Now, it's the same concept in some regards. You'll choose a vice captain and you'll choose a captain. You can actually vice captain or captain your flex position as well. So you might captain Tedesco as your fullback number 1 position. Your fullback 2 position might be Iongi, hypothetically. Your flex position could be a 3rd fullback, and that could be Pappenhausen or Latrell or whoever it might be. And you can actually vice captain Tedesco and captain Trell or Pappenhausen or whoever your flex position is. So in actual fact, now for the first time ever, you can captain and vice captain 2 fullbacks. We never could do that before because we never used to be able to captain or vice captain a reserve player. But the flex isn't a reserve, it's a flex. It's a different type of position. It just adds to our 18 players that we get the best 17 scores from. So we can do that. So what will happen now is you will captain a particular player on your team and you'll vice captain a selected player on your team. So let's say you vice captain a player and they score 150 points. And you go, great, I want that 150. I don't want to take the risk of my captain getting injured or having a low score. I'm going to just loophole that. Fantastic. So previously what would happen is we would then, and we're still the same, we'll take whoever we think will be our lowest scoring player, we'll take them off our selected 18 players and we'll put them on our non-playing reserve bench or non-playing bench. and bring on a player that isn't playing that round, and we'll put the captaincy on them. So that way the captain won't play that round because it's someone that isn't playing that given round due to a bye or injury or whatever the case may be. And then our vice captain's score will double. So the same as last year. But why it's different for is the next step. So previously, what would then happen is because our captain didn't play, we would get our lowest scoring player's score added to our team. One that we didn't select in our team. So whoever was our lowest scoring non-selected player would get their score. And that might be the person that played 10, 20 minutes and we get a score of 10 or 15 from them. That will still happen. You will still get your lowest non-scoring player added into your team. But that will still be a team of 18 players. So because you've now got a team of 18 players, which also includes you've got your doubled vice captain score from 150 up to 300. And now we also have an auto emergency that's come into our team with a score of 10 or 15 or whatever it might be, being the lowest scoring player off our bench that we didn't select. They've come into our team. We've still got 18 players. And due to the new rules of how the flex works, your best 17 count. So that auto emergency that just came in with a score of 10 or 15, now most likely goes back out again. It came in and now she's out. So most likely you're still going to end up with your best 17 scores from players that you selected, most likely, unless someone had a real shocker or maybe an injury or HIA. Look, putting that aside, you'll most likely get your best 17 scores from all the players you selected, and the auto emergency really low score came in that goes out again. So you'll get your doubled vice captaincy score, and you're still going to get all your gun scores from your best 17 players. And therefore, avoid completely these really super low auto emergency scores. So it's a real strategy that we're going to have to look at and try to actually bring in on a week by week basis, knowing that we're not going to end up most likely with a really low auto emergency score. The only time that we will is if one of our players absolutely has a shocker or HIA or an injury or whatever, something happens to them and then they get a low score as well. Then we'll have two players that had low scores. Well, we're going to cop our auto emergency score because that will have to fall into our best 17. But with regards to the auto emergency dropping out, it's a fantastic way that we can leverage off that. So what that means is now with vice captaincy, we may now see, and I would recommend that we would now probably lower down the score we would take from a vice captain, because we're not having to worry about receiving that super low auto emergency score anymore. So we're previously around most coaches around 120, 130 maybe is where they might consider vice captain loopholing, particularly if their auto emergency scores weren't very bad. But 120, 130 was kind of the number. I would suggest now that number has actually lowered. From what I've looked at and looked into, I would say around that 100 mark now, you would need to consider whether or not you loophole that, maybe even mid to high 90s, whether you loophole your vice captain. To lock it away, you have no fear potentially, unless you get an injury or an early HIA from another player, no fear of receiving that super low auto emergency score, and therefore you're still going to get a great best 17 score. If you've got a really strong best 17 players, even though you brought in a non-playing player and a really low auto emergency came into your team, well, we know they're going to go out again. So, and obviously as the week or as the round progresses and we get to the back end of the round, you'd also know that all your players have got through safely and you haven't received any HIAs or any injuries throughout the rounds. So back end last couple of games, if your vice captain or captain was playing in there, you'd kind of know that you weren't going to be caught up in this because all your players actually played their full allotted minutes and didn't receive an injury or HIA. So there are some things we need to look for, but I would suggest that our vice captain score now is a lower number than what it was before. And that's why people are going to be vice captain loopholing a lot more this season, because they're not fearful of receiving a really low auto emergency score. That will just jump back out and we keep our best 17 scores from our team due to that flex position. So it's changed. Now that's a really good segue into structure. The structure is, how do we structure a team? I said at the start, I want to talk about choosing two teams. I want to talk about two teams. So I've said this in a previous podcast. Again, I suggest you go back and look at those podcasts around strategy of structuring a preseason team, because that's what my podcasts are about. I should have mentioned this at the start, so I'll mention it now. It's the perfect time. So we'll just take a pause for a second. If you're watching this podcast waiting for me to go through player-by-player analysis or talk about stats and numbers, look, it's probably not the right podcast for you. You may want to go and look at one of the other hundreds of podcasts out there where they go through player by player or position by position, and you can get all the numbers you want from that and then just do your own double checking of all those numbers yourself for players that you're interested in. This podcast, or my podcast, as the name suggests, is a SuperCoach Strategy podcast with Coach Krupt. So I talk strategy. I talk the thing that I know the best, analyzing a game structure and trying to calculate the odds or the most optimum way of playing that particular game to find an edge. So I look for not just loopholes, but I look for what is the most optimum play in certain positions, whether it's structures or whether it is loopholes, and how can we use those to our advantage. And that's what most of my content is about. I definitely do mention some players here and there that I am looking at or interested in or want you to avoid, but I do mention these podcasts are strategy. I'm one of the only guys out there that actually produces pure just strategy-based content, not player-by-player analysis. So if that's your jam, awesome. If it's not, thanks for watching and thanks for listening. But if it is what you're into and you want to learn how to better structure your team so you can maximize your points that you receive each week, because structure is equally as important as how you choose your players and what players you're putting into your team. Because if you get your structure completely wrong, it's going to absolutely be detrimental to your total point outcome at the end of the round or at the end of the season. So let's move on. I talked about before, we have two teams that we should select. So we have what used to be our 13 on the field and our 4 reserves, so 17 players. Well, now we have one more due to the flex. We have 18 players. That is your team number 1. Your 18 playing players. The 18 players that you are going to be selecting from to score, or who you're going to select, to score the most points from for that one given week. So team A or team 1, that's your first team. Your second team is the other 8 players that make up your 26 players in your squad. Because it's 26 players now, not 25. So it's 26, not 25. So our 18 players is team 1, the other 8 are team 2. They're your 2 teams that we need to focus on. And we need to build them slightly differently. So team 1, your 18 players, you're going to get the best 17 scores out of those 18 players you select every week. So we want those 18 players to be as strong as we possibly can get them. Because we want the highest point return for dollars spent from our cap on those 18 players. And that's why I said earlier on about it's ideal not to have continually people on early buys each round or multiples, because you're lowering down your salary cap. You're not playing with your full salary cap early if you've got premium guys on early buys each of the rounds. You're tying a hand behind your back, really, in essence. So later on, it's nowhere near as important because we have so much depth and way more guns and we can have a lot more flexibility and movement. But early on, it's critical. So our first team of 18, we need to ensure that they are strong, capable players that can produce a good return on the money spent and invested into them. Ideally, we want some value and some growth out of those players as well. We're not just choosing guns that are going to go nowhere or drop in value. We want to still grow that squad value from those 18. But where we get our primary growth from is team 2. Their focus is to grow the bank. They are the bank builders. They are the ones that we should have a couple of players in there that we can call upon if needed due to a few injuries occurring or whatever may be the case. We've still got a couple of players in there that are definitely playable, but they're bank builders. So they're the ones that are growing our bank. They're the ones that we're looking at fattening up those cows, keep feeding them money until they've all fattened up, and then we send them off to the slaughter. So they're the ones that we absolutely just want to get up to the guns or semi-guns as quickly as we can. Because we want to get that depth. We want to have more depth, so we've got more flexibility, we've got more choices every round of which player has a better matchup and who we can put into our teams. So fattening up though that second team is absolutely critical as quickly as we can. But we want to keep our first team really strong. So how do we do that? Or let's go one more layer deeper than what I'm talking. So what I wouldn't want to see, or what I would suggest that you don't do, is, for example, have a really super strong 18 players. Fantastic. I definitely say do have that. But on your second squad, if you've got players, and I'm going to say here 2, 3, 4 players in your next team number 2, those 8 players that are valued around 350 or above, I would just say, look, it might just happen to be that's the only structure that you could create, or it's the only one that would work due to the cheapies that were available. So there may be other reasons that deem that it was as the only possible structure you could go with. But if you've got a $350, $400, $450,000 player sitting on your bench in early days, early rounds that you're not playing, you haven't structured your team correctly or optimally. You haven't optimized how you have structured your first team to get the best bang for buck. I would rather find a cheapie in there that can produce the same kind of growth, or a lower price player that can still get $100,000, $150,000 growth, or whatever it is that you deem your $400,000 player is going to receive that you aren't playing. If you think they're going to grow by $100,000, find a $300,000, find a $200,000 guy you think is going to grow by the same amount, and with that extra 100 you didn't spend, or 150 that you didn't spend, put that into one of your mids and upgrade them to a semi-gun. Put it into a Pia Cora, put it into a Hetherington, and turn it into a Preston, turn it into a Murray, turn it into a semi-gun or a gun that's absolutely going to produce maximum return for you, and more consistently as well. Because that's what we want. We want to strengthen team 1 and fatten up the cows in team 2. And have a couple of players in there that are playable. So people might be like the Roosters' potential winger, excuse if I pronounce it incorrectly, but Toya, if that's how we pronounce it. He would be someone that would be one of the cash cows potentially if he hits the ground. I'd even say an Iongi could fit into that category too. Just because you choose Iongi doesn't mean you have to play him. If he's in fullback 2 position, you don't have to select him as one of your reserves if you're concerned about his output. If you don't believe he's going to get a 35, 40, 45, 50 or above, then you don't have to, just because he's in your team, you haven't got to play him in fullback 2. You can still captain and vice captain 2 fullbacks, being fullback number 1 and your flex fullback. You can vice captain and captain 2 fullbacks like all the people going 3 guns can do. But you don't have to play Iongi. You might have a super strong other 4 reserves that you wish to play. Anyway, so with regards to that, that's what our team number 2 should be doing. You shouldn't be having too much value or any really high value players in the early rounds of the competition and eating up your salary cap. They're just there to build money and get your value up as high as we can, as quickly as we can, so we can upgrade more of them to guns. So we've got more guns sitting in our team. So hopefully that concept makes a bit of sense to you and you understand that. If you want to look into that a little bit further, again, another layer or 2 deeper, please go back and watch or listen to my earlier podcast from last season where I do just talk about it a little bit more. It's still valid to today. You just have to remember about the flex position changes that have come in and how that impacts it. All right, I've spoken about the season being broken up into thirds. I've spoken about the vice captain loop and scores to loop potentially being lower. Look, I'll talk about another strategy. So 25 players is what we used to have. We used to have our 17 players that we would select, and then our remaining players, 8 players to make up the 25. So now we have 18 players and 8 other players. So they're our 26 players now. Tommy Sangster, God bless him, Tommy Sangster has come out and said publicly that what they have done this year, because they've added 1 extra player to all our squads, so now we've gone from 25 to 26, to afford to be able to put someone into that 26th position, they had to up the salary cap. Now, what they've done is they haven't exactly upped the salary cap to an amount of money that actually equates to a gun or a semi-gun or a mid even. They've upped it by 150,000. Now that doesn't bias anyone because our cheapest value player is about approximately 200,000, 198. So we actually haven't received enough cash to actually add in another player. So that doesn't seem fair or right. So what have they done? What they have done, and this is why a lot of people are seeing a bit of value at the moment, is they've scaled back prices. And Tommy has come out and said this as well, that they've scaled back the SuperCoach pricing. So some of those players now prices have dropped or decreased, and then they've increased as well the salary cap. They've done that so we can actually fill a squad for our 26 players. So if the player prices have been scaled back and the salary cap has increased by 150,000, so we can afford that extra player, I challenge maybe there might be a strategic way we can play that. I'll come back to that in 1 second. Before I get back to that, I want to ask you a question. Let's go back to last season, or the season before, whichever season you want to think back to. When you had 25 players in your team, I want you to think back to the end of the season. Right at the end of the season, when you're running home with the strongest squad you can have, you've upgraded everyone to these guns, you've got guns everywhere. Out of those 25 players, you wouldn't have had enough trades or time or money to upgrade all 25 players. So most likely, my question to you is, how many guns did you actually have? How many players did you actually have that were active, live players that were playable? How many? Was it 19, 20, 21 of your 25, 22 of your 25? For some, it might even have been 23 of 25 that were absolute guns, all firing, all pickable, that you could have in there each round all the way through to the end of the season. And you created that much wealth and value in your team that you could absolutely upgrade them all, and you saved enough trades, or you had enough trades up your sleeve that you could have those 21, 22, 23 people. I ask you that question because now that we've got 26 players, and I'll go back to that now. Now that we have 26 players, if we understand that we would only ever really play with a squad of 23, 22 active players at the end of the season, and if that's actually the number that we're building up guns towards, we want to get 22, 23 guns in our team by the end of the season, and you could had enough trades, and this year we've got no more trades than we did last year, so we've got the same volume of trades, you're going to have the same capabilities of building up the cash that we had last seasons. So if we are aiming towards 22 like you did last season, or 23 maybe out of those 25 guns or players that were you could select in a given week and that you'd be happy to put in your team. Now that we've got 26 players, I question, do you need it? Yes, we've got a flex position in and we love that because we spoke about that. But do you need 26 active players? You received $150,000 more than what you had last season. And God bless him, Tommy has reduced the value of some of these players, has scaled them back so that we can afford that 26th player. But what if you say, I don't want the 26th player? What if you say, I'm just going to nuff that player out because I can't even fill 25 when I could have 25? And you know what, to be honest, I possibly couldn't even fill 24 players in a season with all the trading I want to do and boosting I want to do and everything, how I run my team. I couldn't even get the 24. So what I'm proposing is, I'm not saying that you should 100% do this, but I want to challenge the way that you're thinking about it. And for some, this would be the best structure for them. Maybe starting off with at least one nuff is absolutely the right way to go this season. Reduce your squad permanently from 26 down to 25 with enough. Take the 150,000, take the scale back pricing, but don't try to have to potentially stretch all those funds across 26 players and therefore flatten out the value or the strength of some of those players in your squad because you're trying to get good players in all 26 positions. Something that you potentially might not even use anyway. You may not even bother or be able to get your 26 players up to guns or semi-guns at the end of the season. If we, like we spoke about before, if you're only going to get the 21, 22 guns, that's 3-4 people in your team that you're never going to actually get there up to a gun. So with the flex position, I feel that there's an opportunity there to take one, maybe two nuffs into this season. That's really like last year, just taking one nuff because we've got an extra player this year. So this year it could be two. And that's the same as taking one nuff into last season. Now with the flex position, it comes the added bonus that we can bring in and out of the flex position anyone we want from any position we want. So with those nuffs, if you can have dual position nuffs that provides flexibility throughout your team, that's actually invaluable because now I can get a second row forward down to center due to a nuff center second row forward that I had, and then I can move my flex position that's a center out of there and take them into my, you can start shuffling your team around more because you've got dual position players. So if you have two dual position nuffs in your team, I'm not saying you should do this, this is absolutely what everyone should do. I'm just saying to you, have a think about it. Have a think about the fact that you're not probably going to get 26 solid gun players to select at the end of the season. So why try and stretch your cap thin now? Why not focus on getting even stronger players in right now, especially these starting rounds? if you remember back to last season and the season before, and typically the season before that, these cheapy players arrive throughout the season. A winger gets injured, a centre gets injured, and then a cheapie comes in. We've already looked at Owen Paddy. We got a little sniff of him the other day when in the trials. So he may well be one that comes in straight away or a little bit later on. The cheapies are going to come, cheapies are going to go. We have a Dragons winger as well that potentially might come in at basement bottom price. We have Kant from Newcastle in the forwards. There are players that could drop in later on at cheapy price. So if you really wanted to later on get rid of that cheapie and put get rid of that nuff and put a cheapie into that position, you're probably going to get the ability to do that later on if you want to. Yes, or you could downgrade someone else in your team and extract that value out of them by putting in a cheapie. Or if you just want to turn your nuff into a cheapie later on when that one presents itself, you absolutely can. But my point is, if we know that the focus is having team number one, those first 18 players super strong, because that's where our best 17 is coming from, then we want to be able to put a max budget towards those 17, 18 players. As long as we've still got one or two that are definitely playable in team number two, those other 8 players, and the rest just need to be there to grow in value. I want you to think about that and to see if that would work for you. Just an idea. Look, let's talk about trading and boosting. Trading and boosting. I've mentioned this again on an earlier podcast, but I want to talk about it this year because I've had the question around what are my thoughts on trading early or saving trades early and boost strategy now that we have a flex position. Do I see it working any differently? And my answer actually is not at all. I don't see it working any differently at all. Let me be honest with you. I've done a lot of research into players that have done well in SuperCoach, looked at their team structures, looked at how they're starting preseason teams, what they look like. I've looked at when they've traded, who they've traded, how they traded. I've looked at multiple years as well of that data. So I'm not just talking off what my own experience was back in 2 seasons ago, coming top 13. I'm talking about other people that I researched as well. So one thing now this isn't a golden rule that fits every single player or every single person that did well in SuperCoach, clearly, because there's not just one way to play SuperCoach. You can play SuperCoach in many, many different ways. Same as poker. There's lots of strategies that can win a given hand or can go well in a tournament. But there's no surprise why certain players continually make the final table, or why certain players continually do top 5,000, top 1,000, or certain players have had high scores overall in SuperCoach because they do certain things. Now, what I want to suggest to you around trading is I'm a big believer, based on what I have done and what I've researched, that you trade heavy, hard, and fast. Heavy, hard, and fast. So what do I mean by that? I mean, don't be afraid to burn through some trades early. Because what's the important thing here? The most important thing is that you get 18 players that are the right 18 to start the season off. Now, you may choose the perfect squad to start off with, but it's not likely. Let's be realistic. It's not likely. You're going to make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. We're not going to most likely perfect the best 18 to start off with that you could possibly choose. So we're going to need to make some moves. We're going to need to be flexible and we're going to need to adapt. To do that, we're going to need trades. Now, there are definitely some people out there that talk about, no, you need to conserve. No, you need to wait on trades. No, you can't blow them too early. You need them for the back end of the season. No, you need them for the buys. No, don't blow them too early. Definitely don't boost. Well, hogwash. Hogwash, hogwash. I don't believe it. I don't believe that's actually the case. I believe that you trade hard, you go fast, and you get to your maximum point producing squad as quickly as you can, and value as well. We want the best cash cows in our teams, ones that are scoring well and building us good value within our teams. And it's a race to the top. Early days, it's a race to the top. It's a race to who can get the best 18 on the park as quickly as possible. That's what it's a race towards. Can you do that by round 6? Can you do it by round 9? Can you do it by round 15? Whatever it is, who can get the best scoring squad as quickly and get to it as quickly as they can? That's the person that's going to lead the charge, and everyone's going to be chasing their tails. There are times in the season you can save trades. Over the buys, if you structure your team well, over the buys, you can save a few in the mid part of the season. And you don't have to burn through a stack of trades come around 8 onwards, even 7 onwards. There are points in there you'll be able to save some trades. So there are opportunities that will present themselves to save trades, but we do have stacks. My suggestion or my advice to you guys though is, for those who have always conserved trades early and not boost hard to get to their team, maybe this season give it a go. Don't waste them. Don't waste your trades for the sake of trading. But we need to get in there, the players, and fix our errors, fix our mistakes as quickly as we possibly can. Don't be stubborn. Don't be someone that sits and goes, no, I think they'll come good. I know they'd scored poorly the last 2 weeks, but I'm really believing them. I've seen enough that I think just, if you got it wrong, you got it wrong. That's okay. Just fix it. Fix it as quickly as you can. Boost if you have to. I boosted the season that I was, again, top 1,000 very quickly, and then top 100, top 20, and finished about 100 and something at the end of the season. I boost, I think, every single round. I haven't got the stats in front of me right now, but I'm pretty sure it was almost every single round at the start of the season. And just blew through the boosts. But my squad value went through the roof because I had all the right cheapies in there and I had all the right scoring players in there. And I went from 20,000 to start after round 1 to then hitting into the top 1,000 very quickly a few rounds later. So boosting to get you up to the top of the ladder and getting the right players in your team and heading in the right trajectory is really important early. Chasing and being 10,000, 20,000 and chasing come the buys or after the buys, it's hard work. You are going to need lots of trades left up your sleeve, and you're also going to need a lot of luck with injuries and restings as well at the back end of the season to get there. It's a race to the top at the start. Anyway, but I'm not trying to convince you 100%. If you are someone that just prefers a more conservative method, absolutely. There's not one way to play SuperCoach. Go for that. Absolutely fine. Take some of the other advice maybe I've given you, but with that one, you can ignore it if you wish. Guys, there's one other thing I want to mention to you. I have been posting about this on my social media channel. I'm running a SuperCoach competition. So for those that aren't aware, I am offering a once-in-a-lifetime prize for the NRL that isn't available, that I'm aware, anywhere else. And that is for $250. That gives you a whole season's competition where the winner can choose between going to Las Vegas to the NRL, and that will include money for flights, your accommodation, a suite there at the NRL game at Allegiant Stadium in Vegas to watch the games next season in 2026 in Vegas and return back as well. So that's what for the winner. Or you can choose a luxury VIP package to Magic Round. If you want to go to Magic Round, and that will include for 2 people, again, it's a part of a corporate area where you will have private access with others who are in this group to go to your own bar, where you have drinks included for all the days, multiple days, 3 days of drinks, 3 days of food included, and for 2 people, and it's also valued at basically the same price as the Vegas package. So if you want the chance for $250 to have to fly to Vegas to watch NRL, once in a lifetime opportunity, see Vegas and all the bright lights and go and have fun there, I can help you with an itinerary because I've been to Vegas a stack of times. Alternatively, Magic Round's in my neighborhood as well. I live in Queensland, in Brisbane, so I can help you with that as well. But a VIP luxury package to Magic Round, or you want to go to Vegas to the NRL game, all you have to do is direct message me, send me a message that you'd want to be involved in that competition. It's an overall SuperCoach comp. $250 for the season is all it is. I've got about half the positions filled already. The round starts pretty soon. So if you are interested, send me a message and I'll get you involved. I will need 20 people for the comp in order to kick it off, in order for that to be a thing. But as soon as I get 20 people, I'll start that competition, and you're only going to have to beat 19 or so others. So it's a very small group of people, which means your odds of winning are much better than being against 1,000 people in a big, or 100,000 people in the whole SuperCoach comp. You could be off to Vegas next year, or you could be off to Magic Round. Anyway, if you're interested in that, send me a message. Guys, I'm going to wrap that up today. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast. I hope you got something from it. If you haven't liked me on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, please subscribe. It means so much to me. I can't explain it to you. Giving me a thumbs up and a nice little comment there. Send me a message and like all my socials, please, and share them around. It allows me to do more of this content into the future. I'm Coach Krupt. Hope you're well. Thank you for listening.